Yeah, so hello everyone. I'm Hina. I'm part of the Wipro Foundation education team. Just want to welcome all of you to this session today, this information session on the changes to the CSR rules. Just to let you know, first of all, that this session is going to be recorded, so it can be made available to those people who weren't able to attend. We have with us here today Chaitra and Sandeep from Merican Consultants. They're a Bangalore-based CA firm, and they've kindly agreed to present some information relating to the new CSR rules, which were announced earlier this year in January. We thought it would be helpful to organize this session to give you an overview of the changes and for you to understand the impact on organizations such as yours that receive CSR funds. The session today is broadly going to be divided into two parts. So first of all, Chaitra will take us through a presentation they've prepared, and that will be for about 20 to 30 minutes, after which we will open the floor for Q&A. So as we're going through the presentation, if you do have any questions that come to mind, I'd ask you to please enter them into the chat box. You'll be on mute for the first half of the session, but please put your questions in the chat box and they'll be taken up by Chaitra and Sandeep once they've gone through their presentation. So I think that's all for now. We can hand over to Chaitra and Sandeep now. So thank you. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Hina, and a very warm welcome to all of you who are present today. Like Hina mentioned, we will be giving you a brief overview of the regulations that came in January and the sort of registrations that have come out as mandatory as per those regulations, right? One second. Yeah. So today's presentation, we are going to be covering a bit of the background of the rules that came out. We are also going to be covering what Section 12A and ETG registrations are under the Income Tax Act, as well as touch upon the CSR 1 regulations, CSR 1 registration, which has been mandated now from April 2021. This is about us, like how Hina told us. We are a CA firm based out of Bangalore. We help clients on finance, tax, and compliance services. I'll jump straight to it. First, CSR 2021 rules, right? What really are these regulations? In January 2021, the government came out with certain amendments to the existing corporate CSR rules. Now, corporate CSR rules, which was in existence since 2014, have sort of had amendments over the past years, some to increase transparency, some to increase the scope of services that a company can provide under the CSR rules. But the regulations that came in Jan 2021 was something that the government envisaged way back in 2019 and 20. Of course, some of them were not notified back then, and they finally got notified in January 2021. And all these rules are now effective. The main one, of course, being from a compliance standpoint, is registration of the NGO part or the CSR partner and inform CSR 1. Now, if you speak about the rules as such, they're mainly aimed at increasing transparency and accountability in the sort of activities that we undertake under the CSR umbrella. And like I mentioned, from a compliance perspective, two things that have now become mandatory. One, registration under both 12A and ETG of the Income Tax Act. And two, a registration with the company law itself under CSR 1. These are two different acts that we're dealing with here. So we just thought, let's set the foundation right before we jump straight into registrations. Now, Income Tax Act, if you look at it, what does it really say? Income Tax Act doles out certain exemptions for organizations which are engaged in charitable and religious activities, right? Income that is earned by such organizations is exempt from the purview of income tax. how do you avail this income tax exemption is you have to get yourself registered under the relevant sections which are applicable with the commissioner or the principal commissioner. Once that registration is in place, there are certain other compliance needs in terms of reporting requirements, and the income that is earned by such organizations is exempt from tax. Also, people who contribute to such organizations, they also get the benefit of a exemption in the form of ATG, right? Anybody as a donor who contributes to such organizations, he or she can claim a tax exemption on that. Now, since the whole idea is to give out income tax exemptions or financial implications on or financial exemptions on the income that is earned. Therefore, what the Act looks at is a financial track record. It looks at the genuineness of the entity, and therefore, a lot of when you file your application for registration also, the tax department sort of looks at all these in a holistic basis before a registration is granted to a trust. Now, from a company law perspective, company law looks at more transparency, accountability, who is the fund going out to, how is it being implemented? So more on the qualitative aspect of it, who are the governing body members? So the registration under company law and the application also sort of seeks to capture information regarding the governing body members, activities, what is the trust been doing for the past 3 years. Those sort of information is what it captures. Now, these are two separate laws. And first, we will start off with 12A registration and ATG registration, and then we will move on to the company law aspect of it. As I mentioned earlier, registration under all the three, that is 12A, ATG, and CSR1 has now been made mandatory. And when I say now, it is April 1st, 2021 onwards. Section 12A and 80G of the Income Tax Act. So I touched upon it in the previous slide. Section 12A provides income tax exemption to organizations such as trusts, societies, or Section 8 companies which are set up for charitable or religious purposes. And one of the main conditions in order to avail this exemption is you need to have a certificate of registration under Section 12AB of the Act. ATG, of course, if you have a registration, the person who's contributing to your trust can avail the exemption on such contribution, right? Who can apply for a registration? It's a public trust, a society, and a Section 8 company. And when I mean registered public trust, registered society, you have to be registered under the respective laws. Like say, for example, it's a trust, right? There is a registrar of public trust. You have to get yourself, once you start the trust, you have to get yourself registered there. If it is a society, you have to get yourself registered under the Registrar of Societies. Company, of course, falls under the Registrar of Company purview. So the requirements is, it's broad-based and covers different scenarios. For today's conversation, we have limited it into two categories, or rather two buckets that we have formed. One bucket is the existing NGOs who already have a registration under 12A and ETG. And the other one is newly formed trusts who don't have any registration. So we spoke about how CSR regulations came in from, or at least the new CSR regulations came in from Jan 2021. And coincidentally enough, even income tax laws sort of went through a similar amendments way back in April 2020, where it has gone a complete overhaul of how you register, what is the documentation that you give, what sort of reporting that the tax department is now asking NGOs to provide. So the rules which were originally notified for April 2020, because of the pandemic, were later pushed for a couple of months. And now finally, the government has come out with a notification that these regulations will be effective April 1st, 2021. So again, like I mentioned, this is not something that has come in just now. It was actually notified in 2020. And now, because of the extensions due to the pandemic, this has now become notified from April 2021 onwards. All right. First category, you already have a registration under 12A and ATG, then how do you go about it, right? what the law says is that if you already have a registration under both, that is, you're already registered under 12A and you're already registered under 80G, you will need to reapply for a renewal of this application. A fresh application needs to be filed seeking a renewal, and of course, giving out details of the registration that you already have. Most of you will be aware that these registrations are PAN based, right? So as soon as you submit your application through your PAN base, all your previous registrations which are already approved under that PAN name will be available for the tax department to scrutinize. Now, how do you go about filing it? Is there is a form called 10A. You will have to go to the income tax portal, your own income tax login. So go to the income tax website, e-filing portal, key in your login credentials, and there will be an option to e-file forms, and you'll have to select form 10A. That's the application with which you need to file for a renewal of application. Now, we have listed out what are the documentation that are required at the time of filing. We will come to each set of documentation. We've also created a brief walkthrough of how the whole application process is, and we'll give you each point wise how do you go about filing of those forms. But broadly, like I mentioned, since the tax department looks at your financials, it looks at your credibility, it looks at what sort of activities you're doing, you'll also observe that what they're seeking is also in line with that. You need your incorporation documents that you have at the time of setting up. If you are registered under the FCRA or taking foreign contributions, you will need to produce certain registered copy of that. You'll also need the audited accounts of the last 3 years. You'll have to give a note on the activities of the NGO. You'll also have to give out details of who are the key management person in the trust or the society, right? Now, for renewal of application, the rules got notified on April 1st, 2021, and it gives a 3-month window within which you will need to go and file for a renewal. So that is June 30th, 2021 is when the last date for filing of a renewal of application is. Who needs to sign the form? Like we mentioned, it's an e-form, right? You'll have to log in through the PAN of the organization, e-file it there. At the time of e-filing, it also asks for a verification. Now, who needs to verify that form is a person who's normally authorized to sign off the tax return for that is the person who is authorized to sign this form as well. Now, validity of registration. See, for organizations which already have a registration under 12A and 80G, you will be aware that there is an inbuilt inquiry process within the Income Tax Act. So once you submit all your documentation, the commissioner and the tax department sort of goes and looks at the genuineness of the trust and does a complete inquiry on the activities of the trust. So for someone who's already been granted the certificate, this sort of inquiry would have already been undertaken by the tax department. Therefore, the renewal period for which they grant the registration is a 5-year tenure that they grant it for. Primarily because the sort of investigation which has been done has already been complete, and the trust and on the assumption that from all the self-declarations that you submit, the activities of the trust are in line with what registrations have been issued. The law also, not just in terms of when you can file the application or the last date of filing, the law also speaks about by when do the tax department have to dispose of the applications, right? So registrations, one, have to be issued within 3 months from the end of the month in which the application was filed. In case of any rejections, they also have to call for a personal hearing or give an opportunity for the organization to present their case or their side of the story before they make a conclusion on it. So 3 months from when you apply. So for example, if you have applied it in the month of June, the registration certificate has to come to you from 3 months from June. So July, August, and September, it should be issued to you. The other 3 things to note is since this talks about registrations under both 12A and 80G, the single form, one single form cannot be considered. You'll have to file two separate forms for it, both under 12A and 80G. It's the same form, Form 10A, but you'll have to file it for two separate, you'll have to file it separately. Right. The other thing is NGOs which already have approvals under 1023C cannot be eligible for 12A and 80G. What is 1023C? 1023C is largely for institutions, educational, scientific institutions, which have their income exempt under that relevant section. They're not again eligible for 12A and 80G, right? We now move on to the second category of it. You will see a lot of overlap between the first category of bucket and the second category, in terms of documentation requirement, in terms of how do you file it, who is authorized to sign. So some of those aspects I will not touch upon it again, but they are largely same as what we discussed earlier. Right now, under this category, you will have one category of NGOs who are not registered under 12A or 80G, or who currently don't have a registration under both, or who have registration under any one. Say you have a registration under 12A or you have a registration under 80G. Those sort of trusts need to reapply for a fresh registration. So if you don't have both, then you need to apply for a fresh registration under both. If you have one of the two, then you have to apply for a fresh one for the other one. Here, the last date of application, this is typically given since it's a fresh application. The assumption is it's a brand new trust that you're setting up, or a brand new organization that you're setting up. So the time limit is actually 1 month before the financial year commences. Since this is being notified, so for example, the current financial year, we're looking at 21-22. If I talk about 1 month before the commencement of the financial year, that's March, and we're already through March. We're standing at May today. But since these rules have been notified effective April, it's better that we go ahead and file it at the earliest, and not delay it further, right? But because by law, the time limit was sometime way back in March, but I think we are in a good enough position to file it now, but we should be prioritizing and filing it ASAP. Now, coming to the type of registration that will be issued. In case of newly set up organizations, the income tax department doesn't have, needs to actually do a full-fledged inquiry like I spoke about earlier. But since they want to promote organizations to be registered and form a part of the entire monitoring process, fresh applications will be granted something called as a provisional registrations, which will be valid for about 3 years from the date of they issue the certificate. The provisional registration has to be converted into a full registration within 6 months from when you commence the activity, or within 6 months from when the registration is due to expire. So if you notice more closely here, although the validity of the certificate talks about 3 years, it is not that you can stay by performing your CSR activities for the period of 3 years. So 3 years from now, a provisional registration, although you're conducting your normal day-to-day routine CSR activities, this registration will not be valid. If you're commencing operations, then you need to mandatorily go and apply for a full registration within 6 months from when you commence your activities. That's the requirement of a provisional registration. Now, what does a provisional registration? The advantage is that without conducting a full-fledged inquiry, there is a provisional registration that is granted to you. A full registration, which is the period of 5 years, validity for a period of 5 years, will be granted only once a full inquiry is made. But the good part is, from a CSR perspective, it doesn't distinguish between a provisional registration and a full registration. So once you have set up and you have got a provisional registration, in our view, it's good enough to go ahead from a CSR. It's good enough as a compliance from a CSR perspective. right? Now, then again over here, what's the time limit for the tax department to issue a registration certificate to you? If it is a provisional one without inquiry, they'll have to do it within 1 month from when you apply. And if it is a full-fledged registration, then the time limit given is about 6 months. We now move to how do you actually go and file a registration. This is how a form looks like. We have taken a PAN-based number of an existing trust. If you see, there are certain fields that are already filled up, right? This gets auto-populated as soon as you key in your PAN number, because the form is only activated once you log in through your income tax portal. So therefore, the PAN is automatically built in. The address, the PAN number, the name of the entity, all of these fields are already keyed in, auto-populated. The other blank fields are where we need to provide information on, right? The section code, now this is something that many of you would probably have a doubt on. What's the relevant section code that I need to choose? So this, again, we have broken it down into 3 categories. In case of renewal, the section code that I've displayed it on the screen there. Just one second. Yeah, sorry. In case of a renewal, in case of fresh, and in case of renewal of ATG or a fresh ATG, these are the section codes that you will need to choose at the time of filing the application, right? Then we move on to the nature of activities. Like I said, an NGO or an organization which is into religious, charitable, or both in combination is eligible for exemptions under Section 12A and ATG. So you'll have to choose the nature of activity accordingly. The type of constitution, it has to be a trust, a society, or a Section 8 company. Whatever is applicable to your organization, you will have to choose that. Yeah. The next one is, it talks about whether you're established under an instrument. Now, what do we mean by this? So when you're setting up a trust or a society or a company, the charter documents that define how you're going to operate your trust, what are the basic bylaws, what are the rules by which you will abide by it, that is meant by the instrument that is established initially. So in case of, and because the CSR rules talk about the fact that you'll have to be registered trust or a registered society, you will need to register these instruments with the respective authority. Now, in case of trust, it's the registrar of trust. In society, is the registrar of society, and company, it is the registrar of companies. And you will need to give the registration number and the incorporation number, which is applicable for companies as well here. And the object of the applicant is something that you, between the what has been provided here, you will need to select one of the options. The last portion of basic information of Part A is whether the trust is revocable or irrevocable. Broadly put, irrevocable trusts are those which, once they have been settled by the author or the settler, it can't be cancelled. And revocable is something that you can cancel. Say, for example, in the trust object, it says that the settler can, so the settler contributes, say, 1 lakh into the trust. The settler can discontinue this at any given point of time. If it is mentioned something like that, then the trust becomes a revocable trust. And if the settler once settled, he can never change it, and the trust continues as per the rules that are framed, and the trustees that run it, it's at their discretion to continue it, then it becomes an irrevocable trust. So this drop down is merely a yes, no, whether the trustee contains a clause for revocable or irrevocable trust. From a 12A and an ATG perspective, irrevocable trusts are something that are considered, because the revocability of trusts, very rarely do you get a registration, right? Then moving to the next aspect of it is registrations under FCRA or Darpan. You will need to give the details of those. The next question is about details of registration. If you've already been rejected in the past, you will have to provide those details as well. 21, clause 21 of section 10, that's point 8b, that's only applicable in case of statistical sciences, scientific research organizations that are eligible to claim. Whether you're one of those organizations is something that you need to key in there. Point number 9 talks about details of who are the key people managing that organization. The details that are required are displayed there. You'll have to give all those details, right? The next part is the assets and liabilities. All these assets and liabilities as on the date of the application is when you will need to key that in over here. Then the last point is, of course, in case of any details of income in the past preceding 3 financial years is what you need to give here, right? After filling this form, the attachments that we spoke about earlier as the supporting documents, those need to be attached, and then you will have to submit it. The DSC of the authorized signatory, you can use that to verify the form, or you can also use an e-verification code like a bank or an Aadhaar linked OTP to verify the form and submit it. Right. This is about 12A and ATG. The other thing, of course, that we spoke about is from a company law perspective, registration under CSR 1. CSR 1 is a new form that has been notified effective April 1st, 2021. The form is unlike the income tax form, which can be submitted by the trust on its own. CSR 1 needs to be verified and signed off by a practicing chartered accountant or a company secretary. So it's not a self-authorized form. This needs to be verified and authorized by a CA or a CS. Right now, what it speaks about is the nature of the information that is required to be submitted is the nature of the entity, the company that you have associated. If it has been set up by a corporate who is already governed the CSR activities, details of that, the track record that it has, registration number, the incorporation, PAN details, all these are required. Here, who can sign the form is, it has to be signed by the trustee or CEO in case of a public trust. In case of a society, it has to be signed by the chairperson or the secretary or CEO. And in case of a company, it has to be signed by a director. Right? So we've reached the end of the presentation. We've sort of tried to make it as simple as possible and cover what are the practical aspects that people face while filing this form. Of course, these are our numbers here. You can reach out to us in case of any questions. We will also now be opening the floor for questions. In case you come up with any or you have any doubts, our coordinates are available with the Wipro team. You can reach out to them and email us, right? So I will now open the floor for questions. We have received some bit of questions through the chat window. We will now be taking it up.
Chaitra and Sandeep, you want to start with the questions that are already posted in the chat?
Yeah, so that's what. So I can probably speak on behalf of the participants. A few questions that we received, Chaitra, is one of the questions was, can the NGOs themselves do all the registrations, or do they have to mandatorily require a CA?
Yeah, thanks, Sandeep. See, so like I think I mentioned it in the presentation as well, the 12A and ATG is something that the trust or the organization can do it by themselves, right? But the CSR 1, it requires an authorization of a CA or a practicing company secretary in order to file the form. So CSR 1 requires a CA or a CS. Income Tax Act, that is 12A and ATG, it can be self-filed.
So I hope that answers the question, answers your question, Himanshu. So that's the question we gathered. So if it's okay, I'll move on to the next one. So another question that we received was an NGO which receives funds from a company whose net worth, it receives the funds from the from a company whose net worth less than 500 crore, and therefore, the CSR rules will not be applicable to them, do they still require the recipient? Are they still required to do the registration under CSR? Rohit, I'm assuming I got your question right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So see, the requirement of a CSR rules, right? The whole governing rules and the procedures, the reporting requirements that stems from the CSR rules is aimed at the main entity which is governed under the CSR rules under Companies Act. Okay. If you were an NGO partner, so what the rules per se say is, if there is a company which is mandated under the law to conduct CSR activities, it has to necessarily do so, say, for example, by its own, or it can do so by associating itself with other NGO or CSR partners. Now, that association with an NGO CSR partner can only be done with partners who are registered under CSR 1 and have the 12A and ATG, or basically are compliant with these new rules. But if you're someone who is just receiving funds, who are not from any CSR mandated company, then no, the requirement is only for those who are associating themselves with the corporate who is conducting CSR activities as per the company law. I hope that sort of answers in that question.
Yeah,
So
it does.
let me just add on to this though, Rohit. So see, even if I'm a donor who may or may not be who may be contributing less than 500 crores, right? I may still require an ATG certificate. So therefore, it is in the best interest, irrespective of what the turnover of the NGO is, you still go ahead and apply at least for that ATG. And the 12A certificate, what it just mandates is, it just ensures that, whatever income the NGO earns, that is the recipient, is going to be exempt. So I hope that answers. It's not necessarily about the turnover or the mandate. It's just useful to have these two either ways.
Yeah, I got that, Sandeep. Actually, the question was more with the CSR 1 rather than the ATG and 12A. Yeah.
Okay, done.
So, Rohit, like I mentioned, right? So the CSR 1, the turnover of 500 or 1,000 crore thing, which is required to be compliant, which is sort of the threshold limits for a corporate to get covered under the CSR rules, right? So these regulations are aimed at such corporate who want to conduct CSR activities by partnering with other NGOs rather than doing it entirely themselves. Now, if you're partnering with a company like that, they will not be able to associate with you unless all the regulations are mandatory, is what the law says. But if you're some NGO which is not partnering with a mandated company, then CSR 1 requirements doesn't apply.
Fine. So I'll move on to the next one. I had a query from Kushal. So in the chat, it just says is 0.6 applicable to section 8. So Chaitra, at the time when you were doing the presentation, I think the 0.6 that Kushal is referring to was more from a trust perspective, that the revocable and irrevocable provision. Okay. So in a single word, section 8 is a company and not a trust, Kushal. So therefore, what Chaitra was covering is, if you are a trust, then you will have to choose if it's a revocable trust or an irrevocable trust. Chaitra, would you want to add on?
Yeah, see, Sandeep, you're right. The question only pertains to a trust, and I'll tell you why it only pertains to a trust. Because only under a trust do you have this option of canceling once you have set up the organization, right? In a company, the people who are initially the founding members of it are not in a position to cancel that company at their discretion, in the sense that once you set up it, the company is a separate legal entity of its own, and then it goes ahead and operates as per the bylaws or the charter documents of the company. Of course, there's an option to go ahead and liquidate it, but that's a separate procedure altogether. Unlike in the form of a trust, say if Chaitra or Sandeep both together decide to form a trust tomorrow, I have the option to cancel the trust. Say I contribute land and Sandeep contributes some money into it. We can still incorporate certain conditions in the trust deed, which says that after 2 years or after 6 months, this trust automatically dissolves, and whatever income is earned out of the trust falls to Sandeep and Chaitra in the ratio that we agree on. That's the only reason why they're asking about revocability and irrevocability, as it is, as this sort of setting up an organization can only happen in a trust format, and not even in case of a society, it's not applicable.
Yeah, so let me move ahead. So just to address your point in summary, that point 6 is not applicable in case of trust. I mean, in case of the company, in case of a Section 8. So I'll move on to the next one. The next query, Chaitra, was an NGO has a 12A registration but not ATG. So do they have to renew 12A and freshly apply for ATG? Is the understanding correct?
Sorry, Sandeep, I lost you there. Can you just
so they have a 12A registration but no ATG registration yet. So going forward, that is historically, so going forward, the question is, do they have to renew the 12A and freshly apply for the ATG? That is a 12A renewal and ATG fresh.
Yeah, your understanding is right. So you'll have to reapply for a fresh ATG registration and renew the 12A. 12A has to be renewed by 30th of June 2021, and ATG, our suggestion is you should do it immediately.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. So I hope that addressed your query, Sajita. So moving on to the next.
Thank you.
Yeah. So moving on to
hello?
the next.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello.
Good afternoon. I am Prabhakar from Marga Society. See, I just want to clarification of that. You said just now it is 30th June for last date for 12A, if I am right. No, ATG and 12A is to be done immediately. Is there a cutoff date for announced for the 12A registration?
See, 12A, when I mean a 12A registration, right? So what we were speaking about is renewal applications.
Yeah.
Renewal applications, whether it is under 12A or ATG, has to be done by 30th of June 2021. That is, if you already have registration under both and you want to renew that under by applying afresh, or not want to, you would rather require to renew this, but that you'll have to do it by 30th June 2021. If it is a fresh application, then like I mentioned, the law actually says it's 1 month before the commencement of the financial year. Okay. And for current financial year 21-22, if you go by the actual and the literal reading of the law, the last date was March. But it's already gone by, and we're standing at May. However, I think for this financial year, we are in a safe position to say that since the rules itself was notified from April, there is no way that someone could have applied way back in March. Okay, so I think that's why we are suggesting that you go ahead and do it immediately and not bother too much about the last date for this financial year. But if you're applying for the next year, say 22-23, then it is March of 2021. You need to apply by then. Did that sort of address your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I'll move on to the next question. Krishna wanted to know whether they can apply for CSR Form 1 even if they have not completed 3 years, Chaitra.
You can, Krishna, see, like I mentioned, right, some of the details which a CSR 1 speaks of is details regarding your activity, details regarding your registration. You can still go ahead and apply. See, the law talks about a 3-year track record, an established track record. And when I mean track record, it's not financial statements, it's not audit. It's the fact that do you have experience in doing this for the past 3 years. So our sense is you can still go ahead and apply, but how these will be taken up at the time of granting a registration under CSR 1 is something that we will need, because there are a lot of representations going in from industry bodies to the government as well to say that for someone who's not had an established track record for 3 years. Is there some way that they can get a registration? We don't have clarity on it as of now. It doesn't bar you from not applying. You can still go ahead and apply. But the registration is something we're not sure of.
Okay. So moving on to the other query that he had is they've applied for a 12-year registration in October 2020, but got a provisional certificate in May 21. Now, what should they do to get the final certificate? Do they still have to go through the same procedure? So for this query, though, I think Chaitra has addressed in the presentation itself what are the from provision to final certificate, what are the things to be done. So we won't get into that. But his query is, do they still need to go through the same procedure? That is the 6 months of activities. Chaitra, could you just give clarity on that?
Yeah, I will. So one thing I'll request, Krishna, is if you can check the certificate and see under what section has the certificate been issued. So I see that you applied before April 2021, but you have received the certificate in May 2021, right? So if a certificate is granted under section 12AC, that should be the section that is mentioned on your certificate, then what you will need to do is you will need to go within 6 months of you starting activity, you will have to go and apply for a full registration, and the same form, that is form 10A, the same set of declarations are required. Just that here what happens is that the income tax department will conduct a full-on inquiry on the activities of the organization, and the full registration will be issued for a validity period of about 5 years. Now, if they have granted a provisional registration to you under the old act, which is 12AB of the Income Tax Act, then you will now need to apply a fresh, again, the same form, the same declarations are required. In this peculiar case, we are not sure whether the new one will come in again as a provisional one or as a full one. But my sense is, since a provisional is already granted, you will get a full registration again this time after completion of inquiry.
So we hope we address your query, Krishna.
Yeah, Sandeep and Chaitra, thank you very much. So it has been provided in form 10AC only. I just wanted to know that you mentioned that only 1 month it takes to get the provisional certificate, but they took almost 7 months. So I just wanted to know if I have anything to.
No, sorry. So the new timeline of about 1 month, Krishna, has come in the new regulations, which is April 2021. And this was actually one of the issues that we as an organization also faced when we were applying for others, that it used to take a lot of time for the tax department to come in. Now, this is a welcome change that they have brought in to say that even the tax department is also time bound, and you can't necessarily dictate timelines only to the applicants, right? So this is something of a 1 month timeline has come in from April 2021, and I think that's one of the reasons you've got it within May. They would have disposed it within a month from April 2021, which is May.
Done. So we'll move on to the next one. Okay, so the question is, could you please share a few acts to get more clear info of registration process of 12A and ATG? That was a feedback from Srinivas. The question was, does every society have to mandatorily reapply?
So I'm assuming that Srinivas, you already have a registration under both 12A and ATG. If you already do have it, then yes, you will need to reapply. Every organization has to reapply for under the new rules. In terms of resources for acts and other general information, anything specific that you're looking at that you want us to sort of share, you can, of course, like I mentioned, that you can reach out to us separately, and we'll be more than happy to provide any clarifications or resources that you require. But anything specific that you want us to clarify now in terms of the rules?
Yeah, because so I have been contacting my auditor regarding reapplication. He seems he's not clear with the procedure or something like. So that's fine.
Sure. You can, like I mentioned, right, you please feel free to reach out any clarifications that you want. We are happy to provide that and assist you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I'll write it.
Sure, definitely. Thanks.
So this is a query from Mr. Ajit Kumar. Chaitra, they want to know, can we apply for CSR whereas our 12A or ATG renewal file is still under process?
Yeah, it's not. It's not something that is linked to 12A and ATG. Of course, there is. See, since you have already applied, right? There is a section in the form of CSR 1 which talks about self-declaring what sort of an entity are you, right? So I would suggest that although there's nothing that mandates you that to wait for a registration to get it, but I would suggest you wait for the registration to come in before you apply for a CSR 1, because it's dual. Okay, you will need to, whatever information that you give in a CSR 1 has to be verified by a practicing CA or a CS. So I think at that time, when the CA or the CS see that you have not already have a registration, I think they will hold off on signing that form and submitting it.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks.
Okay, so the next query is from Sarika. So if the trust deed are in vernacular language, then is it mandatory translated into English for 12A and ATG registration?
Yes. Yeah, you will need to translate it and then submit it.
Okay. So the other query is from Sajita. Under section code, there are many points with many clauses. Clause 1 of the first proviso of subsection 5 or clause 4 of first proviso to subsection 5 of section ATG, which should we opt? So Sajita, I'm not clear with the question.
Sandeep, I think I got it. I'll take that up. Sajita, if you think there's something else that I've missed out, you please ask. See, Sajita, section code, right? I think I clarified that in our presentation as well. The two sections that are applicable currently are 12A and ATG. Under that, there are two subclauses. Okay, there's a subclause 1 and there is a subclause 6. Subclause 1 is a renewal subclause and subclause 6 is a fresh application. And this subclause carries forward for ATG as well. So there's a clause 1 and there's a clause 6. Choose clause 1 if it is renewal, choose clause 6 if it is a fresh one. And only choose clause 1 of 12A or clause 6 of 12A, clause 1 of ATG, clause 6 of ATG. I hope clarifies.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much.
Okay, so it's clause 6 for okay, so it was written 4. That's why the confusion was. Anyway, so I hope it got clarified, Sajita.
Yes.
So the next query. So the next query is there any limit on information providing on note on activities for 12A or ATG registration, or is it confined to just 1 to 2 pages?
Frankly, we've not seen any character limitations on letter limit or the limitation on the number of words that you can use for the note, but I suggest you would keep it brief and have key pointers on what your objects are and your activities are, right? And not, but of course, there are other parts of the section which clearly asks you what your objects are and what you're into. Your trust deed, since you're submitting, that will also contain an elaborate details on what sort of activities you're authorized to do. So it's just a note on the activities. Keep it brief and keep it to the point about what sort of activities, key primary activities that you're doing.
Correct. So just to add to Chaitra's point, it's going to be big enough to hold all that you want to describe in detail, the key activities, Gopi. So, and as Chaitra rightly said, the idea is to only focus on the key activities you want to list out and not put the entire object clause.
Correct, Sandeep.
Okay, so the next question I'm going to take this from Sarika. So we heard that for getting the final registration of 12A after receiving provisional registration of 12A, we need to apply in form 10AB, which is not yet made available on the income tax website. However, it was just said that we only need to apply in form 10A only. Under which clause of form 10A do we need to apply?
Sarika, I think my bad. It is actually 10AB. You need to reapply for a fresh registration under 10AB, Form 10AB, and not under Form 10A. 10A is applicable. You're right. 10A is only applicable in case it's a renewal and a fresh application. But if it's a provisional registration, which needs to go through the rigor of getting a full registration, that form is 10AB.
Okay.
What is provisional registration?
So provisional registration is something that a tax department issues for fresh organization, right? Newly set up organizations or organizations which are set up but don't already have a registration under 10A or 80G, 12A or 80G. Provisional registration is something which has a limited validity period of 3 years. And what they do, so like I mentioned, the Act requires the tax department to conduct a full-on inquiry on the activities that the organization does. Now, without inquiry, they will issue a provisional registration, which is issued within 1 month of your application, and it's valid for about 3 years. But if you're commencing operations before that, you will need to reapply for a full registration.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So if there's
Sandeep,
any
I think we missed one question before that. I think it was from Anava Trust, which says our CA has applied for a renewal in March and not April. He assures me that the certification will get renewed as per the new rules. Is that correct? So yes, I mean, I think in one of the cases also we saw earlier where application was submitted before April 2021, but registration came through now. In most likely scenario, you will get registered under the new rules itself, which is under Form 10AC. In case that doesn't come in, then we will have to reapply for a fresh one. I hope that answers that.
Yeah. And I hope we've covered all the questions. So now I leave it to the participants. If there's anything specific that you'll want to ask, you can go ahead and ask. Just introduce yourselves and probably go ahead and ask the question. Thank you.
Yeah, while we're waiting for any further questions, so we've got about 5 minutes left for this session. Like we'd mentioned over email, anybody who's interested in availing of the services from Merican Consultants, you can be in touch with Sandeep and Chaitra. We'll be sharing their contact details after the session. We'll also share, a link to the recording for reference. I think you've answered a lot of the queries and the presentation was very comprehensive. So thank you so much, Chaitra and Sandeep, for this. If there are any other questions, just invite you to come in now.
Hi, Sandeep and Chaitra. This is Krishna from Avaniti Education and Training Foundation. One last query. This Darpan registration, is it mandatory for all, or I mean, the one who is already having FCRA can go for it, or any other NGOs can also go for it?
Hi, Krishna. So Darpan, as you know, it's not a mandatory registration. Okay, it's an organization set up by the Niti Aayog to sort of collate or bring all NGOs and voluntary organizations under one big umbrella and help them to disseminate more information or relevant information, as well as have a ready database of voluntary organizations. So it's not a mandatory requirement. In case you do have it, then it asks for a disclosure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. No, thanks.
Hello, this is Risha from Northeast Educational Trust. I had a query. In order to receive funds from PSU, does one need registration from registration certificates from Ministry of Corporate Affairs?
Okay, we touched upon this aspect earlier. See, the company law, right? The new rules require that you're mandatorily registered under the company law as via CSR 1. The CSR 1 is issued by Ministry of Corporate Affairs, which is the MCA, and the issuing authority is the registrar of companies. So effective April 1st, 2021, if you wish to partner with any corporate who is governed by the CSR rules, then a CSR 1 registration is mandatory.
Where is the registration? In which website do we have to do this?
See, the CSR 1 is an electronic form, which will need to be e-filed on the company law website, right, which is the MCA portal. Like I mentioned earlier, it's not a self-declaration form. CSR 1 has to be you will need verification and authorization by a practicing chartered accountant or a company secretary in order to file this form. Risha, I hope I answered that question.
Yes, thank you. Would it be possible to share the link of the website where we have to put up the CSR 1 form?
Sure, the CSR 1 form is available on the MCA portal. It's an e-form which can be downloaded, filled up, and once you affix the signature of the CS or the practicing CA, it then needs to be e-filed by them on that portal.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. We have, I think, one question from Anava. We've done the CSR registration. Is it valid? Registration validity, of course, is because of the, it depends on which old rules or the new rules under which you have got it. Again, if you already have a registration, you need to renew it by June. If you don't have a registration, then you will have to apply for a fresh one. I hope that sort of answered.
So, before we log off, I also want to take this opportunity to thank Wipro and all the audience here for giving us this opportunity to present, this for this noble cause. So I really wish this information and this presentation has been at least of some use to you all. And we really appreciate all the work that all of you are doing. And, so that's it. So thanks a lot, Divya. Thanks a lot, Hina, for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you, Sandeep. I think sort of added a very big thank you to all the attendees as well as Wipro Cares. Thank you for giving us the opportunity. And I hope we have been able to solve most of your queries. If not, during this limited time, if you have not been able to come up with a question or you come up with something that during your filing of application, you feel this needs more clarity, please feel to reach out to us anytime. Our coordinates are available with Wipro. And thank you very much